Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Meeting of the Minds webinar on Accelerating Worldwide Plug-in Electric Vehicle Market Development, 5 Policy Interventions. During each webinar, we take a reading on who's joined us, so you'll see a poll pop up right now asking which sector best defines you. Please answer that poll, and that'll give us a little bit of a better idea of who's in the room with us. My name is Jessie Feller-Hahn. I'm the Executive Director of Meeting of the Minds. Meeting of the Minds, as many of you know, is a global thought leadership network and platform for knowledge sharing with year-round digital and in-person programming. We connect global urban sustainability, innovation, and technology leaders across sectors to share best practices, tools, and solutions through our blog, our monthly webinar series, and more than 20 in-person events each year. Our next in-person event is in Cleveland, Ohio on September 26th, focused on how anchor institutions are partnering with startups. So we hope you guys will join us there. Today's webinar is very much a preview into many of the topics and tools we will be discussing at our 12th Annual Fall Leadership Summit, which convenes in Sacramento from November 27th to 29th. UC Davis is a key partner in that event, and we have them here with us today. Registration is open, and we are more than 60% full, so grab your spot while spaces are still available. Scholarships are also available for public sector leaders, nonprofit executives, entrepreneurs, and academics to attend all of our events throughout the year. You can find more information about our scholarships in the footer of our homepage at meetingoftheminds.org. So quickly, a few housekeeping notes to begin. Because of our very large audience in attendance today, you will remain muted throughout the event. Today's slides and a recording of today's webinar will be available on our website after the event for you to share with colleagues that couldn't make it today. You can also find 5 policy briefs from our presenters available in the handout section in the control panel, which you can already download now. That's at the bottom of your control panel, and Scott will be telling us more about that soon. We will also have a Q&A during the second half of the hour. When you have a question, please type them into the questions panel in your attendee control panel as you think of them. So those poll results are going to pop up, and it's very helpful to see how much private sector and public sector we have. Smaller amount of nonprofit, philanthropy, and academia, but that's very helpful. Thanks, everybody, for answering that. We would appreciate your input regarding today's webinar, so a short survey will pop up when you close your browser at the very end of the event. So I'm really pleased to introduce our 2 presenters today from UC Davis. Scott Hardman is a postdoctoral researcher at the Plug-in Hybrid and Electric Vehicle Research Center, also known as PH and EV Center, which we'll be referring to periodically throughout the webinar with that acronym, which is inside the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. Scott received his PhD from the University of Birmingham in the UK. His work is primarily on the consumer adoption of electric vehicles. This includes understanding which policy measures are most effective in growing EV markets. At UC Davis, he coordinates the International EV Policy Council, a global initiative that brings together academics from around the world to develop evidence-based policy recommendations for national and regional policymakers. Gil Tall is our other presenter today, and he's research director at the Plug-in Hybrid and Electric Vehicle, also aka PH and EV, again, Research Center at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Tall is one of the leading researchers in the field of electric transportation in the US and around the world. He is the research director at PH and EV Research Center, Transportation Research Center at the China Center for Energy and Transportation, faculty member for graduate groups in Transportation Technology and Policy, TTP, at the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. So without further ado, I will pass it first to Gil. Gil, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for a great introduction. Hello, everyone. Let's just dive in. So Scott Hardman and I will present today a work that is kind of the outcome of a lot of research that we are doing at the PH and EV Research Center, but also the input of the International EV Policy Council. So we represent our own opinions, but in the back there is a lot of research, academic research that have been done by many people. So I will talk a little bit about our research center, and then Scott will talk about the EV Policy Council. We will present 5 different policy interventions, so we will jump to the policy level of electrifying the transportation system, and we will try to give a few bullet points that are, if not new, at least kind of in the cutting edge of policy and research. So our center, we started about 10 years ago, and then 11 years ago, it was mostly plug-in hybrids, and the comeback of electric vehicles was coming a little bit later, so we are the PH and EV center. But as part of the Institute of Transportation Studies, we are the research center that focuses on the transition, on the change, the adoption of new technologies, the policies we need, who buy and who make this first jump into electrification, how much infrastructure we need, and so on. We work together with other groups at the Institute of Transportation Studies that study longer term changes, modeling greenhouse gases, look at other new technologies like automation and shared mobility, and focus on California, the US, and worldwide. Our center is unique, having a big group of researchers that do only research on plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and other new technologies is their main thing. We have very few people who are doing part-time. We're about 30 researchers, 10 PhDs, 10 graduate students, programmers, and so on. And we have this critical mass of both the researchers and the data. I think that that's kind of one important thing today. A lot of the policy recommendations are based on very little data because we are living in a changing environment. Data collected on few cars in 2011 is not very similar to what happened in 2018. And we are trying to doing a continuous data collection, survey EV owners, survey the general population, collect data from the vehicles, high level, billions of data points. Work with infrastructure providers, and they donate millions of data points on how people use the infrastructure. Work with states and other organizations to have large data sets of where the cars are, regular cars, plug-in cars, EVs, and so on. And what we will present today have mostly California's examples because that's where most of our data is, but we collaborate with organizations that have similar data sets for other states and other countries. Next, Tom Torrentine, the previous director of the Institute of the Plug-in Hybrid Electric Vehicle Research Center, and Scott started this International EV Policy Council, so I will let Scott talk about it and present the first policy briefs.
Thanks, Gil. Morning, everyone. So are you going to give me the slides now, Gil? Yep. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks a lot for joining, everybody. So firstly, I'm going to do a quick introduction to the International EV Policy Council, and then I'll get into some of the policy insights. So as Gil said, we started this group with Tom Turrentine. We started in 2016. We now have 25 researchers, and it's continually growing. We have 15 institutions from 13 countries, and we hope to add even more to that. And what's unique about the council is that every single researcher that we invite to join the council is like heavily involved with following the transition to electric vehicles. So they're all experts, and we wanted to bring together this group of people so that we could develop, policy recommendations that were based on a good body of empirical data, and so that those policy insights would be unbiased, and hopefully policymakers could place more trust in them. So we bring the council together in workshops. We've had 8 of those so far. We'll have 1 more this year in Japan, in Kobe, in October. We'll have 3 more next year. And we come together in these workshops so that we can share our research with each other, our ideas, and so that we can discuss, policy. So the whole aim of the Policy Council was to bring together this large body of research that is sort of emerging now, and try and distill that into something that would be more manageable for policymakers. And so far we've reviewed over 300 studies, and those 300 studies are used to produce these 5 different policy briefs. Because it was very important for us to bring together a strong body of evidence, so that when we are recommending these things to policymakers, we can be sure in that it's the right thing to do. Okay, so now let's move on to these 5 policy interventions. Quickly first, though, I just want to define the scope of these briefs. So we're talking about plug-in electric vehicles, which includes battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, basically any vehicle you can plug in. But we're not talking about hybrid vehicles. A lot of the insights as well will apply to fuel cell vehicles, which is fine, and we also support that, but it's not sort of our specific area of research, but a lot of the interventions we're talking about would also apply to those vehicles. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about consumer engagement. Okay, so this flowchart on the right-hand side is sort of a very simple, high-level way of thinking about the market introduction of any new technology. So for any new technology to achieve market entry, consumers first need to be aware of it, which would mean they know what an electric vehicle is, they know the incentives that are available for them exist, and they know that charging infrastructure exists. They will then move to knowledge, where they become more knowledgeable about the vehicles. They start learning about them. They start learning about the pros and cons and how it would sort of fit their lifestyle. And then after that stage, they move to this decision phase, when they really start thinking about whether or not they would want to purchase this vehicle. And that they may start visiting a dealer, test drive the vehicle, and then they'll finally purchase it. And so, for the market to be successful, we need to help people move through this process. However, at present, we seem to be sort of lagging in this area. So just on the left, for context, we have the growth of electric vehicle sales in the United States, and you see it's continually been increasing. So you would hope that the number of consumers who are aware of the vehicles, the number of consumers who are thinking about buying them, the number of consumers who've seen charging infrastructure would be increasing. But we've actually been finding that that isn't the case. So if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, this is one way that we've been measuring this, and this is a measure of people who are in this decision phase, people who are sort of considering buying a vehicle. So the gray bars, on the left we have 2014, on the right we have 2018. The gray bars are people who aren't thinking about it at all. The blue ones are people who are thinking about it a little bit, but they're not so serious. And then the yellow one, this thin one at the top, that is the number of consumers who are thinking about seriously buying a vehicle, then they have test-driven one. But what we're seeing is that there's no real change in this, despite the fact over these 4 years we've seen huge growth in the market. And if you look at other ways we measure this, the number of consumers who've seen a charging station, the number of consumers who know how to fuel a BEV or a PHEV, and the number of people who can sort of correctly name a model of electric vehicle that's on sale today has also not increased, which to us who are, everybody's engaged with this transition seems crazy, because, we're all aware of it. A lot of the people we talk to are aware of it, but something we're doing right now in addressing these sort of mass market isn't working. So there's an issue there. And I think to solve this, we need to take a more sort of holistic approach. So traditional media, we haven't really seen much of that so far. There's been a recent television ad launched by Electrify America, which I think will go some way. And I should note that the data we have for 2018, is the cutoff date of that data is just before that advert was released. So hopefully this year we may see some sort of growth in that. We also need to do continue doing ride and drives. It's pretty active around Sacramento with ride and drives, which is great, but we don't think that gets people to the awareness phase. That's just great for increasing knowledge and helping people decide to buy an EV. And then finally, we also need to help educate dealers. We're finding that dealers and car salesmen have very poor knowledge of this. So when people go and they finally want to buy a vehicle, they can become very dissuaded from buying it because the dealers, aren't able to tell them what they want to hear and answer all the questions that they have. Okay, so next, purchase incentives. So there are 4 different ways, 4 the most common ways to incentivize people to buy an electric vehicle. The first is the tax credit in the US, which gives people $7,500. Then you have a rebate, which is what's used in California. It's $2,500 after you buy the vehicle. The bottom left is an example from the UK where there's a grant put on the purchase price of the vehicle. So when you go and buy the car, it's already discounted. And then finally, something that was used in Washington until it expired this year was a vehicle tax credit. And the important thing about these is when the incentive is received. So for tax credits and rebates, they're received after you buy the car. With grants and tax waivers, they're received before you purchase the vehicle. So it's already applied. So often we find in the research that incentives that are applied at the point of sale or sort of beforehand can be more effective than these ones that are received afterwards. So we've known now for a long time that incentives are very important in the market. We typically find that around 30% of electric vehicle sales are as a result of these incentives. But what we've been learning about recently is that this sort of importance of incentives isn't constant, so it's been changing over time. So this is from surveys we've done from 2010 to 2016, where we asked people, if the federal tax credit were not available, how would this impact your decision to buy a BEV? And if people answer no change, it means they'll still buy their vehicle. So what we're seeing is this red line is declining, which means the number of people who would still buy their electric vehicle without the tax credit is falling. So as we progress to later buyers of electric vehicles, we're finding that incentives are actually becoming more important, which is obviously not what we want to hear because incentives are going to be phased out, but this is something that we need to think about. And, we think this is because in the very early days of the market, it was people who were extremely enthusiastic about the vehicles, typical sort of early adopters. But now we're moving towards more of the mass market who are, more reliant on these incentives. So yeah, for policymakers, that's challenging because they need to carefully think about when these incentives should be removed. But at the moment, all we can say is that now is not the right time to do that. And, we're going to continue monitoring this and hopefully understand this issue more. Okay, so next I'm going to move on to reoccurring and non-financial incentives. So these are incentives that you get during your ownership of the vehicle. And it can be anything like being able to drive EV in a HOV lane or a carpool lane, being able to drive them in bus lanes or transit lanes. It can be free parking, discounted parking, any sort of measure of any number of things that just make it more convenient or to own an EV. And in understanding the importance of these, it really depends on the local sort of market conditions. So if you think about California, HOV lanes are quite important for buyers, but they're typically most important in the San Francisco Bay Area and the LA area for a couple of reasons. One, there are a lot of HOV lanes there, and two, there's a lot of congestion. So the importance of those really, it depends on sort of the local, congestion, but it also depends on, the preferences of buyers. So, some people may not be so motivated by that, others might be. And then we see sort of a similar thing in other places. So if we think about Norway, drivers there, the most valuable incentive for them from survey data is the toll roads. And then they also get access to special sort of vehicle lanes. And that's sort of the fourth most important thing for there. So the importance of these really can differ. But generally what we find is anything that can make owning an electric vehicle cheaper, easier, or more convenient than a gas car will be effective in encouraging people to purchase the vehicles. But for policymakers, often which incentives they can use will depend on what they have available in their sort of local market. So if I just give one example, one of our colleagues in Sweden was learning that in Stockholm, they wanted to ban gas cars from the city centre, but the city had no power to do that. So what they started thinking about was, well, they have control over parking in the city, so potentially they could just ban gas cars from parking there. So that's just sort of an example of how it can kind of differ based on the regulatory power of local agencies. Okay, so now I'm going to hand back over to Gil, and he's going to talk about charging infrastructure. Okay, Gil, do you have control?
Thank you, Scott.
Great. Oh, Gil, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Hi. So yeah, I will talk about charging infrastructure development and the policy relevancy of that. And let's start with a little bit of background. So I think that the way we talk about charging infrastructure, we are kind of a little bit biasing the policy today because we usually talk about home charging, work charging, and public charging. While the right way to talk about it is while at home, while at work, and so on. It's a mouthful, but that's what we are actually looking at. We are not just looking at charging at your home, but while you are at home overnight, uh, where do you charge your plug-in car? What kind of infrastructure is needed? What kind of policy is needed? In many cities, overnight can be a charger at your local elementary school that is a block or two from you, being used by teachers or other commuters during the day, being used by neighbors overnight. In high density locations, home charging may be public garage, city-owned garage that is used by the public, used by workers, and therefore workplace charging can be a charger owned by your employer, but also can be a charger owned by the city or can be a charger at a park and ride location or at a public transit hub. So policies that are focused on workplace chargers should, for example, include public transit hubs, and that's important part of workplace charging. Public charging is just the same. They can be used by, retailers and so on, but multi-use will always benefit the infrastructure and the users. The last part is the corridor use. From many years in modeling effort, we were thinking about fast charging as something happen on your way from point A to point B when you stop at the corridor. It's still true for some trips, but in general, people are not doing so many very long trips. And corridor charging is important, but it would be better to combine it with the previous location. Charging levels. In North America, we are lucky to have 120 volt chargers, which add about 2 to 3 miles of range for an hour of charging. It may not be enough for many cases, but for example, if you drive 10 miles a day or even 15, that's just enough, regardless of how big is the car battery. Level 2 is the more common one, 208, 240 volts, and then the charging speed can get you between 20 to 40 miles for 8-hour charging, even more. And the fast chargers, who get faster and faster in the last 2 or 3 years, that depends very much on the battery size of your car. It can get 80% charge in half an hour and between 50 to 150 mile range, kind of on average. So I picked one very full figure with a lot of colors, but let's talk about it. This is public charging in the U.S. And the title here is Public Charging Enables More Electric Vehicle Mile Travel. So it enables more electrified travel, but is not a prerequisite for EV adoption. When we see who is driving electric cars today, full electric, plug-in hybrids in the US, who buys them between 2011 and 2018, people, 80% charge, more than 80% charge their car at home. Even the people who are not charging their car at home are doing it usually because they have free workplace charging, not because they are unable to. And at home, I mean overnight. Again, sometimes it's not their home charger, but overnight charging is the most important charger. That's what allowed them to buy the car, to drive it, and then they combine other locations to get lower cost and to get a little bit more range if they drive plug-in hybrids. So, for example, 16% of our sample use both home and work. But Tesla drivers usually use home and others, meaning the Tesla free fast chargers. They can also use work, they just don't need it. They already have a free option and a good base at home. Home charging is sufficient for most people. If they drive further away from the range of their car, they can use fast charger every once in a while. If they have a plug-in hybrid, they just drive on the hybrid mode of the car. And at least in 2017, 95% of the BEV owners had at least one more car in the household. So if they do want to travel to a place that have no DC fast charger or a very long trip, they just pick a different car in the household. So when kind of looking on how people behave with a electric car today in the US, tomorrow in the US, we think that we need to put more effort on home location charger. They are the most important, and then followed by while at work and public is a much lower level of importance. And the charger level, the charger speed needs to be optimized for a specific use. And the specific use, not just the size of the battery. Level 1 is fine for short trips and location with long dwell time. So if you have a plug-in hybrid at home overnight, you can charge it with level 1. If you park at work for 8 or 10 hours, you can charge it with level 1. Much lower cost of installing it. And sometimes we can get more chargers, slower chargers, and it's better than having very few with high power. The third bullet is very important. Charging should not be free, as this can increase congestion and reduce dependability. So what we learn from how people are using the chargers, they are optimizing cost, which what we're expecting. And free is always better. So you may have a charger at home, but you will use the one at work or in public because it's free. And when people are using free chargers, they are congested. There is no way to build enough chargers if they are free. Always people will prefer the public ones, the workplace one, and they will always be congested. If they are congested, and today half of the workplace chargers in California are congested, they are not dependable. If you really need this charger in order to make it back home, you cannot trust it. And therefore, we believe that for the long run, free is not a sustainable option. We can do it now, we can do it as part of growing the market, but for the long run, we have to think about other options that will optimize behavior and will able to cover the cost of the infrastructure. So charging should be managed by pricing, but there are other ways to manage charging. Location. If you put the chargers, all of them, at the best prime parking spots, everyone will use it because of the parking spot. If you mix them, some in a good parking spot, some in less desire, people who really need a charger will go for the less desired locations, and you will always have few more chargers available in the back lot. make the slow one free, make the fast one paid, and connect smart charging, vehicle grid integration, so you can manage the charging without the driver's or the owner's intervention. So you can stop charging when needed, you can start it, and help the help manage the loads and so on without the driver's intervention. We will need all of those, and we will need them soon. In California, we already see a lot of congestion, and we already know that same as roads, you cannot build your way out of it. The last topic we would like to talk about is regulatory mechanisms. The first four we discussed and that Scott discussed were more about incentivizing the market and making consumer buy the cars and the infrastructure making use the cars. It is very important to remember that there is another mechanism, the way that force OEMs or original infrastructure manufacturers, car companies, to build electric cars. And if they build electric cars today, that's what creates the market. If you do a survey of who wants to buy any commodity that is not on the shelves yet, people don't want to buy it because it's not there. So we want to see cars on the road, cars at the dealerships, so people will buy it. It's happened in California, and it created the market, and it has a very strong trickle effect. States without the ZEV mandate, that are not part of the ZEV mandate, they don't have to have cars, have a lot of cars because the car companies jump in and build to fulfill the ZEV mandate and then some more. And we see today the impact of the ZEV mandate in California and in China, both in Washington state, but also in Norway and other countries that can incentivize them and take the benefit of the OEMs build the cars. So region without ZEV mandates may want to consider implementing such a regulation to similarly, signal their intent to accelerate the transition. It creates more cars. It also creates more models and more types of vehicles. Saying that, we still need to differentiate between PHEVs and BEVs. BEVs are full electric, and we would like to incentivize them more than semi-electric cars that the engine can start every once in a while. And just asking the car companies to make these cars without a more holistic approach of policies that will incentivize the purchase and will create the infrastructure may backfire on us. So it always has to be part of a holistic approach. So we kind of picked 5 key takeaways, and Scott, if you want to jump in, I will kind of just go through the 5 and let you add something, and then we can go to the question and discussions.
Okay.
So the 5 key takeaways are not the 5 top ones, but the ones where we saw that need to be more developed in many regions. First, making vehicles, infrastructure, incentives available is not enough to increase awareness and knowledge. The states of California, the federal government gives a lot of money, but many people don't know about it. A more proactive and widespread approach is needed. Just creating the infrastructure is not making people know about it. Financial incentives are more important when approaching main market. If politicians and others ask, when can we just stop giving incentives? When we get into main market, we can start talk about it. Right now, it's getting more and more important over time before it will be less important. Reoccurring incentives can have very strong regional effect, but they may not be a long-term solution. HOV lanes, bus lanes are getting congested, parking revenue lost, and so on. But for the short term, for the early market, it's a very strong incentive. Home location charging is the most frequently used and the most influential in purchasing decision and vehicle usage. Infrastructure is not a barrier for early market, it is an enabler for the main market. We need to think about it as an enabler more than a barrier. It's not a chicken and egg problem when it comes to electric cars. For most people, they can buy it and drive it and enjoy it even more when infrastructure is getting better. The ZEV and NEV in China have regional and international effects on the PEV market. So PEV market success can be achieved without it. Norway, Washington State, and other places, even so, it's a lot of the halo effect of this ZEV mandate. So, Scott, if you have anything to add before we go to questions?
I guess that covers most of it. I guess I can say that those 5 points are 5 points we've taken from 5 documents, and within each of the policy briefs there are at least 5 key takeaways for each sort of policy area. So, obviously we haven't been able to cover everything in these policy briefs in this sort of quick 30-minute presentation, but so I'd encourage people to go have a look at those policy briefs and have a read of them, and just sort of get a little bit deeper into the sort of things we're talking about. Yep.
Great. And Scott, can you talk a little bit about the newest policy brief that just came out?
The 5 on the handouts.
Yeah, the newest one that is only available this week is the ZEV mandates policy
that's
guide,
right.
correct?
Yeah. So we've been producing these for the last sort of 18 months, and this week we just finalized the one on ZEV on the ZEV regulation. So that's available in the handouts on the control panel, but it's not actually available on the website yet. So I'd definitely click download on that one. You can get a sneak peek before everyone else.
Great. Yeah, and so those 5 handouts are available in the handout section as PDFs, which everyone can download. With a lot of questions about whether the slides will be available. A copy of the slides will be available on our website, which I can say yes, they will be as a PDF on the webinar event page on meetingoftheminds.org. So we'll make the slides available as well. We had about 5 questions about that, so hopefully that answers your questions. We have a lot of questions coming in, Gil and Scott, so we'll just move to questions. There is a question about from Chris King. This is probably for you, Gil, first, and then maybe over to you, Scott. If public charging is not a prerequisite for EV adoption, then why did Tesla spend $100 million on building a nationwide public network? Gil, you want to address that first?
Yeah. I will be happy to. So I'm not saying that it's not a good way to create more, to accelerate the market. And Tesla did a very smart thing, because when you buy an electric car, even if you will never drive it from LA to New York, you want to be able to say that you can drive it from LA to New York. The same way that I have a 4-wheel drive, and one day I will buy the boat that I want to, have with it. And Tesla is in the business of selling electric cars, and their infrastructure creates this halo effect. Saying that, most of the Tesla drivers can plug in at home and get all of their driving needs, or 95% of their driving needs, without using any of the chargers that Tesla was putting out there. Most of the Tesla drivers who use the public infrastructure, the free public infrastructure, are actually substituting home charging with public charging. Only in very few cases they use it to drive further out of the range of the car.
All right. Scott, anything to add?
I think Gil mostly covered it. I suppose the impact of that is increasing sales, but without that infrastructure you could still have the sales. And I guess the point here is, we don't, if someone was in a region where they don't have much infrastructure, they may feel that there's no point in promoting EVs, but that's not the case. People can still charge at home. So, even if there's not a huge public network, there's still a role in promoting EV sales.
Great. And Gil or Scott, what is the cost of a Tesla charger versus a regular charger for home? Is there a big cost difference?
There is a huge cost difference. So a fast charger, a DC fast charger, as the Tesla network and the other network out there is tens of thousands of dollars. The cheapest you can get one or install one is 30 to 40, and it go all the way to 100,000 sometimes. While a home charger is between a couple of hundreds to a thousand or $1,500, and it's the main idea of having electric cars. You don't need to look for public infrastructure unless you travel more than the range of the car. And of course, we are talking about the early market today, and we are talking about the mostly in the U.S. When we will get later for a multi-unit dwelling, people who live in apartments, they will need more infrastructure. When we go to places like China, when people live in apartments, we need more infrastructure. So this one is true for the U.S. In the next few years.
Great. That actually gets right to my next question from Rosanna Francescato. She says, Gil, first for you. You indicated that home location chargers are the most important. What solutions are there then, if any, for people in multi-unit buildings or those who must park on the street?
So as I said in the beginning, we are not doing a good job in defining overnight charging versus home charging. And so the most important location is the overnight charging. It's the most reliable location. We know where to find the car, and you are there every day of the year, almost every day of the year overnight. And for MUDs, we need to start thinking about when and where and how much chargers to install, what kind of cars people at MUDs will drive, and it's very dramatically between different areas in different states and different countries.
Great. So a question about range anxiety. Maybe this is for you, Scott, first. Has there been a study on range anxiety versus tolerable or acceptable charging time?
So I guess this is talking about, is there some sort of middle ground between range and how quickly a vehicle can charge? I
think so, yeah.
I haven't specifically studied that. I don't know, Gil, have you looked at that?
And no, not in a combination between the two, but I think that the range anxiety and speed of charging is rarely something that is correlated. We think about range anxiety as you drive somewhere, and as I said, in a corridor, you stop on your way because you find that your range is lower than what you expected. But that's very, very rare occasion. It's happened mostly in the movies. Well, in reality, people are not driving without planning their trips, without knowing how far they need to go. If they know their car, sometimes they're willing to go to very low state of charge, getting home with 2 or 3% because they know that they can make it. And if they do a long trip, if it's more than the range of the car, they think about the location that they will stop ahead of time. What we did study here at the PHEV Center is the willingness to stop for chargers, for fast chargers that are 20 minutes or so. And we learned that about a third of the people will not do it more than once. So once meaning they will just drive a different car. And most of the EV owners, if it's a long trip, are willing to stop one time for a charging on the way, but not more than that. If they need to do more than one charging event, they will drive a different car or will change their plans.
Thank you. Brant Arthur has a question. He says, in our community in Northern California, we're struggling with providing while-at-home charging for multifamily dwellings and have recently talked more about building fast-charging plazas in the vicinity of multifamily housing. Do you two have any thoughts about this fast-charging plazas idea?
I imagine Gil will have something to say about this, but if you can't for some reason build a charger at someone's home, you can often build something at their workplace. So rather than just building, a very expensive fast charging plaza, maybe another option is to develop charging where those people are commuting to. Maybe that could help solve the problem. But yeah, I'll let Gil also answer.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Scott. So the fast charging plaza idea is that multi-unit dwelling people will buy a BEV, a full electric car, and then they will charge it at kind of a gas station location. I think that it's not the best benefit or cost benefit thing to do. I think that when we think about multi-unit dwelling buyers today, they should buy an electric car if they can plug it in at home or while at home, let's say in a public charger, run them overnight, or at work, and then use the Plaza or any other fast charger as an additional every once in a while. So let's say every day they can charge back at home almost to 100%, but then they need a little bit of a boost. They will stop at the fast charger once a week or once every 2 weeks. The idea that charger plazas will be a gas station, I'm not sure that it's the best public, the best way to support EV adoption today.
Okay. This is also tied to this questions of multi-unit housing, which we have a lot of questions about that, which is interesting. If a real estate developer is designing multi-unit housing, office buildings, retail, parking lots, and streets, how can a developer determine how many charging stations to plan for? Gil, maybe first to you.
It's a very good question, and it's very, very different between different states in the U.S., different regions. For sure, it's different countries. So it's hard to give a number, but I would like to start with how many cars are there in multi-unit dwelling. So, for example, in California, there is a really big difference between how many cars detached house owners have and how many cars people in an apartment have. And then out of these cars, how many are likely to be full electric and how many are likely to be plug-in hybrids in each year. And I can refer them later to different tools and forecasts and by location. And then we can think about, if you have 100 units, 100 apartments, you may have 1, 5, 10 electric cars next year, maybe 20 in a couple of years from now, and so on. And 2025, 2030, the numbers will be much higher. So the plan needs to be flexible. Today you have the guy at 1A that have an electric car, and next year you will have the guy at 60C have an electric car. And you need to put charger that will accommodate both of them. So it's about flexibility, it's about finding the right locations, it's about the way to move chargers when needed, and so on.
Okay. Scott, anything to add?
I think Gil covered most of that. It's hard to come up with a number, but yeah. Yeah. So local context specific. Michael Peters is wondering, maybe this is for you first, Scott. For those of us in states hostile to EVs, can you point to any policies or mandates instituted at the local or municipal level that have been successful? I can't think about any specific examples off the top of my head, but this is sort of the example of parking incentives, which can be controlled by the cities rather than the state government. So in a state that's hostile towards EVs, it's probably not going to be possible to have a state rebate or even introduce a ZEV mandate, but it might be possible to work with utilities. Maybe they could offer a small rebate. SMUD and PG&E in California offer around $500, which is something. Then in Sacramento, they offer like parking. Initially it was free parking, and then it was discounted as more EVs started parking there. So I guess it would be looking at what the local agencies and policymakers have control over, and then trying to figure out what options there are available. Yeah.
Right. Anything to add to that, Gil?
I think that Scott is right. The city level have very strong influence on parking policy, and good parking location, chargers at parking location is a good start, a kickstart for the EV market, even if the state is not supporting it. And then you can see these cars, and people get the benefit of buying it. Ordinance about installing or making charger-ready parking lots and new housing developments, so they don't need to invest a lot of money when they do want to buy the car, but they have the conduit ready and so on. So the city have a lot of ability. Cities, regions, and utilities can substitute for a lot of the state level policy.
And local municipalities also have some control over zoning for incentives for developers to install private parking spaces, no?
Yes, correct.
Right. Great. Some questions. Jillian Holloway is wondering, maybe this is for you first, Scott. What role do you think the California state government should have in installing EV infrastructure? Or what have they done so far? What's coming down the line that you think will help incentivize, and what role should they have to play here?
I'm going to hand this to Gil. I think he has a much better view of this, especially
Sure.
because he's worked in this area much longer, so I'll hand over to Gil.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So the state, we're trying everything. We're trying to let the private sector doing it, and then the utilities control it, and then subsidize it, fully subsidize. And I think that the answer is that we need it all. And the state need to help on early years when the market demand is not high enough. For example, for DC fast chargers, as I said, it's not going to be something that people use every day again and again and willing to pay a lot of money. So we need a couple of hundred electric cars or maybe even thousand for every charging location, every fast charging location. We need to subsidize the upfront costs and then recover it later down the road. The same time, we need to control the locations, help multi-unit dwelling, help disadvantaged communities, cover gaps in places that today have no business case in installing chargers, but someone need to put a charger so you can get between two communities. This is where the state and the region need to help. It's a supporting role more than leading role.
Okay, great. Actually, there's several questions about utilities, so I'm going to combine a few of those. One is utilities are increasingly looking at EV charging as a possible way to manage additional solar power coming from the grid or renewables, both rooftop and utility scale. Do you have any input about how to incentivize charging during those hours when we have excess solar power? And then also to combine that with a question about what role will microgrids play in DC fast charging? Maybe first to you, Gil.
So for the first question, yes. First, I agree. There is a great opportunity here with using the loads of the EV car market to manage the grid in the future. And the first answer is very simple. When people ask how many workplace or while at work chargers we need versus how many overnight, it's very much depend on how much renewables you have in each hour of the day. So in some states, in some locations, we would like to invest more in charging in the afternoon or during the day, and try to build the infrastructure for people that can do it instead of home. In other locations, we would like people to do it overnight when the demand is very low. So first thing is to combine the infrastructure planning with the grid planning. Second is what we call vehicle grid integration, when you can slow or stop charging during the day if the demand peak, or start it when you have access power and so on. And we can keep it simple. There is a vehicle two grid, like two ways, but even one way, when you can just control the speed and the timing, can do most of the job. About microgrids, there are a lot of studies on it, and there are benefits. It all the initiatives that combine thinking about the grid and the energy and thinking about the transportation part together create a multiplier effect that is positive.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Scott, anything to add to that?
I guess we could talk about the Netherlands. So that they have a similar problem, but their issue is with like wind power. So what they're doing is rolling out smart chargers, which provide cheaper electricity during times of high wind and more expensive charging in times of low wind. And I guess that system is pretty hard to implement, but that sort of smart charging approach is one way to look at it.
Right. There's a couple questions about supercharger networks and stations. Roger says, I was in Norway recently, observed 6 Tesla Model S or X at the supercharger station, which had 8 charging stations or more. There was one level 2 or CHAD mode charger there with 3 EVs at it. Only one car could charge at a time, so the 2 were waiting perhaps hours to charge. It seems like a deterrent to going fully electric. My wife and I have 2 Tesla, one Model S and one Model 3. Lucky guy. No gasoline-powered cars at all. The supercharging network makes this possible since we do take the occasional trip. What can be done to make multiple chargers for non-Teslas to use? Gil, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we need to invest more in this in the chargers, and it takes time. It's going to be congested. We will never be able to build free chargers that will be on holiday eve and everyone travel empty, and you will have no line. If that will be the case, this charger will be underutilized 99.9% of the time. So we need to find a balance, pricing, timing, location, and so on. We have public investment. Electrify America is part of the settlement, is putting a lot of money into fast chargers across the U.S. Other subsidized chargers are coming. It's a slow process, but I think that the message is this is not our daily life. We are not going to need these chargers every day when we commute or drive to a short trips or even long trip. With a Tesla Model S, people, I think that on average, a household in the U.S. do 5 trips a year more than 200-mile range. So it's 2 or 3 trips a year that the Tesla Model S will need the fast chargers to get somewhere.
Right. Great. Thank you for that. My last question for both of you. I'm not sure who wants to talk about this first. Dick Lee is asking, how will Germany's regulation to ban the sale of new cars with internal combustion engines in 2030 impact the adoption of BEVs in the U.S.? First to you, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing about all these gas car bans, which is something that we need to be careful about when we're talking about them, is I am not aware of a regulation yet that specifically bans the sale of a gas car. Most of the announcements have come from policymakers announcing their intention to do it. But I mean, even in Norway, where we were a couple of months ago, they were like one of the first countries to announce this. But we were meeting with the policymakers, and they're like, we haven't banned gas cars. That's just what the media is saying. So first thing is to be careful about what's actually going to be in the regulation, and then I mean, I guess its impact on sales in the US. I guess you could hypothesize that it will increase sales because there'll be more electric models available from like Volkswagen, Audi, and things. Another thing is it could maybe reduce sales because supply of those vehicles is directed towards Germany where they have to be sold. So, yeah.
And in the long run, it's a big trend. The car companies' global trend for electrification. With or without the EPA or the federal government, we see a very large trend that happened globally, and then California and the U.S. is only part of it.
Yeah, great. And we'll be hearing from Toyota, Ford, and Daimler about their electric vehicle plans at our annual summit in November. So hopefully everyone can join us to hear more from them about that. Well, that takes us almost up to the top of the hour. So I'll say a couple quick things. A short survey will pop up once everyone closes their browser, and we really appreciate your feedback. We hope to see you at next month's webinar, as well as on our blog, submitting your comments and hearing from you and your ideas, and at one of our many upcoming events around North America. All information about our events and resources is available at meetingoftheminds.org. I just want to quickly thank Gil and Scott for your time today and all the work and the wonderful 5 policy briefs you've shared with us that everyone can download on the handout section in the control panel. And thank you, Gil and Scott, for everything and for all your time and work on this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Great. Everyone have a wonderful day, and that concludes our session. Have a great day, and thanks again for attending. See you next month.